All right, we're back on the cheap Turbo Coupe Ratrod build. Last time we saw this car, we ended up getting it completely stripped down in terms of the parts that bolt on. Basically anything that you can disassemble on this car without taking a grinder to it. The next step in this teardown slash build up is going to be tying the front and rear subframes and stiffening up the car before we cut off the roof. Like I explained before, these cars are a unibody car and they don't have a true traditional frame. The weak point on these cars is the middle section here, which is just basically sheet metal on the floor. They rely on the A pillars, the B pillars, the front and rear subframe, help tie in the center part of these cars. Again, you have this front section here, this front subframe, and you have the rear torque boxes here. And there's nothing in the center from this point to this point that are actually tying any of this together. So if I were to end up leaving it the way it is, cutting off the roof and the rear quarters, the structural part of the car would be diminished and there'd be a lot of flex in that middle section. There's two ways to do a subframe connector on the Foxbody platform. There's an underbody and then there's also an inside the car version. Now for right now, I have the sheet metal of the Mercedes all mocked up with some random wheels that I had. And this is kind of the style that we're going with. Super low, super on the ground, tires and wheels tucked. Now since we are going this style rat rod, the body and the floor pans are going to be super close to the ground. The downside of doing a external kind of underfloor subframe connector is it's going to be super low to the ground and you'll lose that ground clearance. The second style subframe connector is an in-floor pan style connector. Now for ground clearance purposes, that's the style that we're going to go with. It was a kit that I could have bought for about 250 bucks. That was all prefabbed and you basically just cut it and weld it in. But since this is a budget build, I just ended up getting some regular 2x2 14 gauge wall square tubing that we are going to essentially try to mimic that kit. Save about 200 bucks and we'll be able to put it to somewhere else in this build, continuing to make it cool and unique. Saving this piece, and once this square tubing is recessed and welded into the floor, we're going to probably notch around this that's over the square tubing. We're going to reburn through all that so that way it has the strength of the bulkhead. So just in case we decide to use the stock mounting locations for certain types of bucket seats, even though I want to try to make this car into a bench style seat. The driver's side subframe connector all fabbed up and tacked into place. I ended up changing up the design a little bit because I wasn't super happy with how high the rear part of the subframe was sitting. If you look at some other companies that make these, they don't end up having you cut the actual rear floor pan at all. The real part of the floor pan that you end up cutting is this front section, so that way you can set the tube inside the front subframe itself. So now this square tube sits inside the front part of the subframe. We'll weld that whole seam up top, and then we'll end up welding the floor pan and this seam to the square tube. Normally what you do is you put a big plate right here and you'd weld the square tube directly to the plate, but since this is going inset to the floor pan, the tube ends up going underneath this humped part of the floor pan into the back rear seat kind of subframe wall. I don't know if this is just the Thunderbirds or if it's also on the Mustangs, but this rear subframe isn't connected physically to that rear piece of sheet metal that the square tube would have originally been welded to. So what I decided to do is run the square tube inset the floor. When it exits the rear part of the floor pan, it actually ends up going underneath this section of the rear subframe, and I have to add this piece of square tube in after because of the way it's designed. I can't get it into the floor pan because it gets too wedged, but weld this seam and clean that up, and then weld this all in so that we have about 5 to 6 inches of physical square tube welded to the rear subframe. It's a little more work doing it that way, but I think it'll pay off in the long run because I think it'll be a lot more stiff. Also, this is one of the first times that I'm actually firing up the multi-process welder that I just bought. It's Eastwood MP200i AC/DC TIG welder and a MIG welder and stick welder. This is by no means a paid ad or anything like that. They did not send this to me. I paid full price for it, but I just wanted to give a shout out to them because it's a very nice machine. As a professional welder that actually uses Everlast and Miller welders all day long, this Eastwood is actually putting in some good work. So I'm actually very impressed for how much welder you get for the price point. Again, they did not send this to me. I paid full price, but if Eastwood, you know, for some reason you're watching this or somebody you know is watching this and you want to collab somehow or send out some other cool metal shaping tools, I won't be upset. But I just wanted to let you guys know that this is definitely a good home machine for somebody who is looking to build hot rod projects and just tinker at home and learn how to weld. You know, I knew better too. Before you start cutting things, especially floor pans, look underneath the car to see what you're cutting into. Driver's side, I knew about the e-brake cable. Passenger side, you got this whole bundle of lines. Feed line, return line for the fuel, and brake lines. Thankfully, only hit the brake line. Crimp that off, set those aside. Yet another thing to fix later on. I gotta say, flaring brake lines is my least favorite thing to do with cars. I don't know if I'd say least favorite, but it's up there. Top 5. You never get it right the first time, and then you flare it and forget to put the fitting on. Back working on the Thunderbird. We got the subframe connectors all welded in. Everything is all sealed up for the most part, other than I think I'm going to do some automotive body seam sealer on the bottom, but I'm not going to do that until the car is way farther along and a lot of the fab work is done. We got the seat bulkheads welded back in on both sides. I was going to do a tie-in plate right here, but since this subframe connector goes through the body it underneath to the rear subframe, it's actually not necessary. Now that it's all fully welded in, putting a plate right here wouldn't really do much in terms of strengthening it up. But the front part of the subframe connector dives into like kind of the firewall, footwell area. That's all sealed off on both sides. Pretty much the next thing to do is get this roof chopped off and start chopping off the rear quarters. Now I originally tried to save the glass, the front windshield, because maybe somebody might use it or whatever. But honestly, after trying to deal with that, it's a royal pain in the ass, and I don't want to deal with it. So guess what? We're gonna smash it and just get right to it, because it's just a waste of time on something that isn't worth wasting time on. Probably try to save the quarter windows, because I'm sure that's something that somebody might be able to use. Again, this car is actually really clean. I know I keep saying I'm a little guilty chopping this car apart, but at the same time, when you're doing a build like this, you're already dealing with enough rust on the other body, and you want to start with a solid base that you don't have to do a bunch of rust work or mechanical work like brakes and everything, and all the little stuff that adds up in price and also just in time. Then all my guilt goes away, and I don't really care, because this car is pretty clean, and it's going to be an awesome structure start to this Ratrod build. Basically, what's next is to deal with all the wiring for the stereo. This whole back panels for the equalizer and the subwoofer and all that other stuff. All these wires back here go to the taillight harness and the fuel pump. So we're going to just set that stuff aside, pull that stuff all out, and then we're going to start chopping up the sheet metal on this thing. This is the best way I can come up with taking out this glass. Is just breaking it. And I've always wanted to test the theory. Apparently, all you need is a piece of porcelain of the spark plug, or the broken spark plug. And apparently, that's enough to crack a windshield. So I want to test that. All it did was kind of chip it, which you can't even really see. How about the whole spark plug? It helps if you hit the windshield. Well, yeah, it broke it, but not like I hoped. I'm pretty sure an old differential will break the windshield. Not overthink it. Just do it. Well, shit. I don't care that the glass broke, but it's a little more messy to clean up than the windshield is. And also, I spent the time to cut the whole bottom of the seal, and I couldn't get literally like 4 inches on either side. And I thought I could maybe just push the roof up. It'll peel off.
That's not bad. How many heavier than your average Thunderbird roof?
Look at that. It's got no roof.
Oh my god.
It doesn't look like much of a car now. Just floor pans, sheet metal, motor that doesn't run. But can you picture it? Picture this. Cruising in this thing. Last night we got some good headway on the T-Bird. Cut off basically all the exterior sheet metal and anything else that resembles a Ford Thunderbird. We did a rough cut of the rear quarters and the rear apron just to get an idea of what the inside structure looks like. We're going to use as much of the inner structure as possible. And of course, trimming where we need to. I have a feeling we'll probably have to trim this kind of fender line here to make it fit width-wise. Basically, it's a Thunderbird go-kart. Here's some of that rust that I was talking about originally when we first picked up the car. No big deal for us because we're going to be cutting that out anyways. What you have to do next is pull a bunch of measurements on the new body and see exactly where we got to trim on the donor chassis. When we cut the chassis off of the 59, we did a very rough cut. Wherever it was rusted out and easiest to cut and quickest is what we did, just to separate the body from the chassis. So obviously the inner rockers are all rotted, so all that has to be trimmed off. Just by looking at it without even pulling any measurements, that whole front firewall is probably gonna have to be trimmed basically up to that bottom of the windshield motor. From the looks of it, we'll probably have to just trim the inner part of the wheel well, so that way it hopefully sits right on top of the Thunderbird wheel wells. These inner rockers, they're all rotted anyway, so what I'm hoping is I can just trim on this body line here and save this outer portion and rebuild this, or it might work out that it mates right up to the Thunderbird. I would like to keep this upper apron, hopefully mate that to the rear kind of firewall of the Thunderbird so the stock seats meet up and bolt right up. And then back here, the side walls, inner fender wells, those are all super solid on both sides. So I'm hoping to do minimal trimming, basically straighten and clean up that cut on both sides and have that drop right down on the rear of the Thunderbird chassis. Kind of get a rough idea of what I can trim, what I have to keep, and work towards our goal of mating these two together. I know I'm not the only one that falls victim to the while you're in theirs, because I got this whole motor pretty much ripped apart, at least the front of it. It all started with trying to replace distributor drive, auxiliary shaft, and distributor. Then I started cleaning up the oil residue that was over on the front of the block. I noticed there was a coolant leak anyway. Found out the water pump, which is extremely crusty and old anyway, leaking out of the small weep hole in the bottom here. Of course, your water pump is crusty, and now your upper and lower radiator hoses are crusty and disgusting. So, of course, you got to replace those. Might as well do the thermostat and thermostat housing because those are crusty. And while all that's all ripped apart and you're waiting for parts, you might as well go ahead and pull a valve cover and fix a oil leak that was already there. Even building a car on a budget, this stuff is pretty simple and fairly cheap, and it's worth doing while you have it all ripped apart anyway. That way a bad water pump doesn't leave you stranded anywhere. It's worth spending the 40 or 50 bucks it's going to cost to replace it. So I just thought it's funny that even budget builds are not immune to the while you're in theirs. Alright, it's been a minute since I've updated, but the car runs and it drives. We put the new auxiliary shaft in, the new distributor, water pump, thermostat, did all of that fun stuff that's easy to get to when you have the front of the motor ripped apart. Cruised around the yard to make sure it ran, which is perfect because we have the heater box, the dashboard, everything that is not needed for a car to run is out of the car. It's just down to the bare bones, wiring, sheet metal, steering, and steering column. So, now I did say that the car ran, but now it doesn't. We took the tank out because as I was doing some measurements, I was realizing that the distance from the center of wheel to the back horn, basically of that section area, is a lot shorter on the 59. We're gonna have to trim this back section a pretty hard radius on either corner, and we're also gonna have to bring it back probably at least 9-10 inches, probably around this point here, which it wouldn't be a big deal. But the gas tank became a problem because the mounts where the gas tank straps mount to, right in the area we're gonna have to probably cut. And since we're gonna be doing a bunch of cutting back here, I didn't want sparks and everything flying on a gas tank. So one less thing to worry about is catching on fire and puncturing a hole right in our gas tank. So gas tank's out. This whole back area is just sheet metal that we can trim. We got the heater box and the dash out. Now I have a better idea at where we can trim these front kind of A-pillar horn sections. They have a pretty good flare out for the Thunderbird, and I know for sure we're not going to need any of this whole corner. Basically, it's probably going to be trimmed from this point in here and then a radius point right in here. I gotta do a little more trimming on the 59 body. I have all the dashboard accessories out of it. Now it's pretty much just sheet metal, and so I'm going to cut all that out since it doesn't bolt in there, and it's just going to be in the way. So my goal is to reuse that dash just because it's such an iconic dash. It really just completes the car. So we have the crane set up again. Once we trim that dashboard, the body should be ready to mock up on the chassis, and then I'll get a better idea at where we can trim the rear section on the Thunderbird chassis. All right, big progress so far on the chassis swap here. We got both the body and the chassis inside the garage, undercover. We don't have to worry about the weather right now. But anyway, we got a chain hoist set up to the roof rafters, so we have a way to lift the body up and down. The body is pretty much just plopped on top of the chassis. There is still a ton of trimming left to do. So far on the front dash section, we trimmed these horns that were sticking out for the old A-pillar and the windshield. So those are trimmed on both sides, but there's still a ton of trimming left to do. Probably end up having to basically trim this whole section here and this side section here, and then plating it after and make it structurally sound for that to accept this width and that radius of this cowl here. And then we'll have to rebuild this A-pillar running down to the rocker, so that way we can remount front doors. I wanted to reuse the old mounts on the 59 body for the front doors, but the insides were so rotted that there wasn't really much left to it. You could see where they were connected to on this windshield frame A-pillar here. So we'll end up having to rebuild that and making it functional again, and that goes for both sides. Right now we have the rear wheel wells pretty much centered where it's got to be. So I have an idea of where we have to trim in the trunk area. This is the biggest part that we're gonna have to trim on this car, this rear back half here. So far, overall, I'm happy with how it's going on top. I mean, I've done minimal trimming, and so far, the body is really actually pretty close to fitting. So it's a lot of just fine tuning back and forth. That's why I have the chain hoist hooked up. Basically, just the simple figuring out how to make this body fit on this chassis. But we're going to start that in another video. I'm going to end this video right here. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on the next one.